Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this virtual masterclass. My name is Juan Alamo. I'm a music teacher, music professor at UNC Chapel Hill. I teach percussion, classical and Latin percussion. And today I would like to talk to you a little bit about Latin percussion, more specifically Afro-Caribbean rhythms and percussion. So I would like to start things off talking about what I consider to be the foundation of Afro-Caribbean music, specifically Cuban music, which is the clave. And I'm sure that you probably have heard that term before, and you might even be familiar with the rhythm and the instrument and so forth and so on. But I would like just to touch on some simple concepts that I consider to be the foundation for this music. So, of course, clave refers to both the instrument, which is what I'm holding, and also a rhythm. But more than a rhythm, I would like to stress out the importance that this is a concept upon which Cuban music and most of Afro-Caribbean music is built upon. So don't view this just as a rhythm, but rather as a concept, as a foundation that it needs to be understood and mastered in order to play this music authentically, with the authentic feel and with the authentic flavor, if you will. So just to start things off, there's two different claves, right? There's a lot of misconceptions. One is the rumba clave, and the other one is the son clave, which is the one we will concentrate the most because it's the one that is most often used in both Latin popular music, such as salsa, or Latin jazz, which is kind of the topic that we will sort of center this discussion around. So rumba clave, the difference between the two is there's a note that is delayed. So just but before I get to that, basically this rhythm is a two-bar phrase. One bar has three notes, so we often refer to that bar as the three side, and then the bar that has two notes, we refer to that as the two side. You will notice that on the rumba clave on the three side, the third note is delay, is on the anaphore, whereas in the son clave, the three side of the bar, the third note is on beat four, and that's the difference between those two. So this is how rumba clave will sound like, and so this is the quarter note: one, two, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. I 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. I 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. I 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the son clave, the third note on the three side of the clave will be on beat four rather than and a four. So it sounds like this. This is son clave. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Now, in Latin music, music in general, depending on the melody, and this is key, this is important, you could either start on the three side or the two side. What's going to determine that is the melody, right? So that's the next thing that I want to talk about because it's important when you play this music, whether you're a percussionist or whether you're a trumpet player or guitar player or whatever, you should be aware of this, but particularly if you are a member of the rhythm section, because the patterns that you play all have to abide by this rhythm, all of those patterns need to be in harmony, so to speak, with this two-bar phrase. So let's pick a tune. One of the most popular Cuban tunes, all tunes, that is very well known here in the States. It happens to be kind of the first Cuban tune that was very popular, made very popular in the 1930s. In fact, it was recorded by Louis Armstrong when after it was first introduced here by Don Aspiazu um, um, in 1930. And the title of the tune is The Peanut Vendor or El Manicero. And that tune has a sort of a 2-bar riff that the piano and the bass plays underneath the singer and the melody that perfectly illustrate how this concept of how the melody determines the clave works. So the riff that I'm referring to that you're probably aware of or you might have heard before sounds like this. Beat up, beat up, beat up, beat up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, the clave again has two different measures, right? So it has two. It's a 2-measure phrase. In general, the 3 side, if you look at it, is more syncopated, right, than the 2 side. The 2 side is very straightforward, just 2 quarter notes on beat 2 and 3. The 3 side, whether it is son clave or rumba clave, is the more syncopated. You have those 3 notes, one on the out of 2, one on beat 1, and then depending on whether it's rumba or son clave, the 3rd note will be on beat 4 or on the out of 4. So by default, the 3 side of the clave is the more syncopated. So when you are listening to a melody, check out which part of that melody is the more syncopated. Usually that's the one that is going to feel better on the 3 side of the clave, which is the case with El Manicero. So if we go back to that melody and you listen to it, the second part of that melody, tira pa pira para pira pa pira para, is more syncopated than the first measure. So therefore, the 2-3 clave will feel a lot more better, more natural than the 3-2. So let's try it. So this is El Manicero 2-3 clave. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Tira pa, tira para, tira pa, tira para, tira pa, tira para, tira pa. Now let's take another tune that you are probably familiar with because it's one of those iconic Latin jazz tunes, Manteca. So if you listen to that opening statement, opening melodic part, sa pi pi pa bi pa, which side of those 2-bar phrase, which bar you think is more syncopated? So 2, 3, 4. Di da di di ah di di ah di da di di ah di di ah di da di di ah di 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 ah. If you listen carefully, you will notice that the second measure is more syncopated. So that melody is also on 2-3 clave. Oh, pi pi di ah di di da pa, pa pi pi di pa bi di pa pa, pa pi pi di pa bi di bi di ba di ba di Let's pick another melody. Let's see. Let's say we're going to sing Happy Birthday, but instead of singing it in 3/4, we're going to sing it in 4/4. So with a Latin feel, if you will. So the melody will pretty much sound like this. Happy birthday to you. 3, 4, 1, 2. Happy birthday to you. 2, 3, 4, 1. Happy birthday. So forth and so on, right? The first side is going to be more syncopated. Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you. Notice how the phrases that I'm singing line perfectly with the 3-2 clave. If I were to do it on 3-2, it won't groove the same. It will feel a little bit awkward. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. See, nothing lines up. Happy birthday. Now it's lining up. To you. Happy birthday to you. And so forth and so on. So if you take, I don't know, another melody like Caravan, it will also work better with a 3-2 clave. E, Be da 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 dee dee da da. Dee 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 da da da. Dee da da dee 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 da da. Biddy biddy. Ba ba dee dee biddy. Yeah. Okay. Now, one, don't get discouraged. This is one of those things that at first will take time, and the more you listen to it, the more familiar you get with. What I would recommend, or what I always like to make the analogy that this is the same process that you have to go through if you're a guitar player or like a trumpet player, about learning how to play in tune or even tune your instrument. The first time that you have your horn or your guitar in your hands, you either have to have somebody tuning the instrument for you, or you have to have somebody sort of correcting you and indicating whether you were in tune or not, right? The more you do it, the more you started playing and getting more acquainted with, okay, this is how it sounds, what is in tune. Ultimately, eventually you got to the point in which you were able to tell whether you were in tune or not, or you were able to tune the instrument by yourself. So it's kind of the same thing with this concept. The more you listen to this music and the more you practice, the more familiar you with it. Because ultimately, what you want to do, you want to get to the point in which this becomes second nature, and you don't have to even think about it, and you can feel it and play your phrases and your rhythm perfectly in harmony with this clave rhythm and this clave concept without even have to think about it. So a couple of exercises that you could do if you really want to get good with this is, for instance, start by just taking the clave and play the clave and then count the beats. So count 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. Now let's try 2, 3 clave. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. Another thing you could do is take those melodies that I mentioned before, go back to the video, and then see if you can sing the melodies and then clap the clave, okay? If you are a guitar player or a bass player, even a pianist, another thing you should do is try to play the rhythms that you use to play the accompaniment, whether it's a montuno or a tumbao, a bass line, and sing the clave on top of that, right? If you're a trumpet player or a saxophone player or guitar player or whatever, try to improvise something, your lines, and tap the clave. Like just take a blues and then just start scatting your lines. Beep beep da ba, beep ba, ba 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 dee dee boo doo boo doo ba ba beep ba beep dee dee ba ba dee dee boo doo boo doo boo ba 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 dee dee boo doo boo doo boo ba ba dee dee ba dee dee ba boo doo boo ba ba. And do that with the two claves, with the 3-2 clave and the 2-3 clave. Have fun with it, and make it be part of your vocabulary. And I guarantee you that once you get familiar with this, then you'll be able to play this music with what we like to say, the authentic feel. We're going to move on to the second part of this, and on that part, I'm going to explain and demonstrate some of the basic grooves that we use in some of the Latin percussion that we typically play in Latin jazz. And then I will also demonstrate how those instruments work together. And then at the end, I will just also talk about a little bit of improvisation, both rhythmic improvisation in for drums and also for melodic instruments. How you could, again, based on the principle and the concept of the clave, how can you improve your sense of rhythm and be able to play with a more authentic Latin feel when you play this music. So stay tuned. The first instrument I would like to talk about is the Conga Drums, which is kind of the foundation in this music, in Afro-Caribbean music, and more specifically Cuban music. It's kind of the instrument that holds and keeps everything together, if you will. There's a pattern, a basic pattern, or standard pattern that we call the tumbao. That is basically the pattern that we use to play salsa music, soul music, Latin jazz, cha-cha-cha. So it's sort of a pattern that applies to different rhythms or genres, if you will. And it involves a couple of different sounds that I would like to demonstrate first. First, we have what we call the heel-toe motion or technique. By heel, I'm referring to this part of my hand and then the toe. So and we have this back and forth motion, just so you can see from the side, heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe, right? So one thing you might want to just do first is just practice that motion on both hands. Make sure your arms are relaxed, and then you get a nice even sound. Place your hand in the middle of the drum, right? So that's the first sound. The other sound that we use in this instrument and to play that rhythm that I mentioned before is open tones. So if I place, you see this curve here. If I align my knuckles with that curve and position my hand there, then that will be the perfect spot to produce that open tone. One important thing that you might not be able to see because of the angle of the camera is the drum has to be tilted forward, right? We don't want to play with the drum flat because the sound won't project as we need to. So we want to make sure that we are tilting the drum forward, holding it between your legs, and then you get a much better sound that way. So you have the open tones. And then if I move, again, using the reference of that curve, if I move my hand forward and instead of using this, aligning these knuckles, and I align the knuckle of my thumb finger with that curve, then that will be the perfect spot to produce the slap, which is the other sound that we need to produce to play that rhythm that I mentioned before. And this is the sound that you're looking for. There's two ways of playing that. So this is what we call the open slap. Then if I place the opposite hand on the opposite side of the drum, then I create a less brighter slap, which we can refer to as a closed slap, right? So open slap, much brighter. Closed, less brighter. Okay, and this is the one that we really need to develop and pay attention first and foremost, because that's the one we're going to use. And those are the three sounds that we need to be able to produce in order to play the tumbao. So I'm going to break it down in steps. The tumbao starts with two notes. Everything is eighth note, so we're going to be counting in 4/4, and everything is going to be eighth notes. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So the 1 and the first two notes is heel toe, right? 1, 2. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and heel toe 2 and 3 and 4. The next note, beat 2, will be the slap, and you leave your hand out. 1 and 2, 3, 4. 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 Then the next three notes will be toe, heel, toe. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Let me slow it down. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and heel toe. 1 and 2 toe heel toe. 1 and 2 toe heel toe. 1 and 2 toe heel toe. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. and then the last two will be two open notes, and that will be the whole rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, on the previous video, we talked about the clave, and I said that everything that we do in this music has to abide or has to be in harmony, if you will, with the clave. Now, the clave, as we discussed before, is a 2-bar phrase. Okay. Now, this rhythm, what I just played, is a 1-bar phrase. So it really doesn't matter whether the clave is 2-3 or 3-2. It will start the same, right? So if we're playing Manteca and I'm just playing this drum, I'm gonna start and play the same rhythm over and over. If we play Happy Birthday that is in 3-2, I will also start the same way. It will change once I add this drum, but we will save that for later. So let's just play the tumbao singing the clave 3-2 direction and then 2-3 direction, very slowly. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, da, Now let's do it 2-3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, what happens when you add this drum? This drum needs to be played on the 3 side of the clave. That's the law. You can now play it on the 2 side, okay? At least for now. So we will play this drum every time we get to the 3 side of the clave, specifically the second note, okay? Boom, boom, bebop. That's where this drum is gonna be played. So I'm gonna sing the clave. We're gonna start. Actually, I'm gonna count 4. You and I, everybody, will be singing the clave, and then after one time through, I will play the conga drum and keep singing. You keep clapping. 1, 2, clave, 3, 2, go. Tumbao. Do it 2-3 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 let's add the 2. Okay, so this drum, those 2 notes will always be played on the second note of the 3 side of the clave. That note is often referred to as the bombo note, by the way. That second note on the 3 side. on, on, that note, on, it's often referred to as the bombo note. On. Bombo means bass note in Spanish. All right, so just maybe I show you a couple of the rhythms, and then we move to the timbales. So again, this tumbao rhythm, you could use that to play a salsa tune. You could play a Latin jazz, like a mid-tempo, faster tempo Latin jazz. You know, like Mantega, that's what Chano Pozo is playing. If you listen to the recording, if you're playing a cha-cha-cha, you just play that same thing, just slower. If you're playing a mambo, like mamboing, so it's the same rhythm. Okay, now if you need to play a 6/A rhythm, there's different ways of playing and different types of 6/As. But the most standard or generic one that you will need to play in a Latin jazz situation is the 6/A bembe rhythm. And one simple way of playing that rhythm is like this. So we're going to start with two notes on the left hand, the heel toe, and then everything else is going to be a combination of heel toes and open tones on both drums. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Slightly faster. This thing we're playing, I don't know, Afro blues. Dee da dee da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Dee dee da dee dee da dee dee da dee da dee da. So that's the 6/8. Now let's move, if you will. Let's take a plane and go to Puerto Rico. If you go to Puerto Rico, there's two rhythms. And there's more than two, but there's two that are native of Puerto Rico, who and sometimes people use in jazz, especially over the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years, musicians have been more inclined to incorporate these rhythms just to expand the sound palette and the rhythmic palette of jazz. So one of them is called plena, Plena, and the other one is called bomba, Bomba. Let's start with the plena. When you play that music in the original format, there are 3 frame drums of 3 different sizes, and each one has a different rhythm. The lower drum usually plays a basic rhythm that just keeps the time. 1, 2, 1, 2. You could just basically do that, which is what we're gonna do on this drum, right? The other rhythm on the middle drum, the segundo, so the lower drum is the salidor, you know, which pretty much refers to kind of the bass line, the basic lower part. Then the middle part, the segundo part, plays another rhythm that goes like this: 1, 2, and 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 2. Then on top of those two, you have another that is the quinto part, or the requinto part, the high pitch drum. which is a lot more syncopated, and it's the one that makes this rhythm groove and sound very interesting. And it also engages in improvisation, and pretty much the basic rhythm sounds like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm gonna sort of pick little pieces of each of those parts and adapt it to the conga drum. So we're gonna start with this, and we're thinking in count time: 1, 2, 1, 2. Carnival music, right? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Let me slow it down. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and then 2, 1, 2, 1, and then 2, and 1, 2, 1, and then 2, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So that's the plan. The other rhythm that is very popular in Puerto Rico, that is being used in Latin jazz, also music, even in hip hop, or what we refer to as reggaeton, is bomba. Now, within this so-called bomba is kind of an umbrella term, and then within that umbrella term, you have different variations of, I don't know, 20 some and 30. I don't even know all of them, to be honest with you. But the most well-known and the most popular one is Bomba Sica, S-I-C-A. And there's a couple of different ways of playing it, and of course they don't play these typically on conga drums, but on a slightly different, smaller, deeper, lower pitch drum called barriles. And one basic way of playing the Sica is this. So we can start with a slap. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So one slap, and then the rest is all open tones. I'm going to do it very slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 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 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slow 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Okay. Now let's move from Puerto Rico to Trinidad and Tobago, and there's a style of music there that is extremely popular, and a rhythm called Calypso that is also often used in jazz music and popular music. In fact, there is a very famous tune that I'm sure you probably played and heard before called St. Thomas by Sonny Rollins that pretty much uses this rhythm. The cool thing about this rhythm is again, it's a very groovy, funky, catchy rhythm. It's all open tones. So it will be a good rhythm to just start playing this instrument and get a good sound. So very slowly the rhythm sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, naturally that music is meant to be played at a much faster pace. So for instance, if we take St. Thomas as an example, the common tempo for that will be around here. So if you notice, every time I play a rhythm, I think of a song or sing a song. I will encourage you to do that. Again, in order to develop an authentic feel for this music, the best thing to do is just to sing along, listen to it, play along, and get that feel and that sound internalized. So it's not so much about the coordination aspect. I mean, that's sort of a process we have to go through, but you need to get to the point in which it becomes second nature and you start feeling the music rather than thinking the music and sort of analyzing it while you're playing it. You don't really want to be doing that, but you want to be just being able to feel it and to play it freely and expressively with the authentic feel. And the best way to develop that is just to learn tunes, sing along with it, and always be mindful of, if you're playing Cuban music, particularly the concept of the clave. Perhaps another rhythm from the Caribbean that sometimes it's not as common, but sometimes people use is merengue, which is from the Dominican Republic. This instrument is not originally used in that music, in the original setting. They use a different instrument that unfortunately I don't have with me, called a Tombola. It's a two-side drum that you put on your lap, and then if you're right-handed, on the right hand you will have a stick, and then on the left hand you will just play with the open hand, and you can play rhythms. For instance, let's pretend this is my right side of the drum and this is my left, so you could for instance, a rhythm that is commonly played there is something that sounds like this. Again, it just doesn't, doing it like this doesn't do justice to that music. But just to give you the idea. Now, what you could do on the Conga drums is play a generic pattern that most people use when playing merengue music in a jazz setting or a popular music setting, not in a authentic folkloric setting, because in that context this instrument is not used. But so you could use a pattern that sounds like this. Slowly, 1, 2, 3, 4. The other instrument that I would like to talk about is the timbales, which is the instrument that I have in front of me. The rhythm that we use to accompany or to support the conga drum, the tumbao that I explained on the previous video, there's different ways that we can accompany and support that tumbao rhythm. It all depends on the section of the tune in which you are playing. So if you are playing, for instance, if you are playing a salsa tune and you are playing the verses, we play on the side of the shells, what we call the cascara. If you are playing in the choral section or the mambo, the brass interludes, and so forth and so on, then you typically play the cowbell pattern. In a jazz setting, if you are playing the melody, right, typically you will play cascara. Once you get to the solos, especially horn solos or percussion solos, you can either play on the cowbell, or if you have a right cymbal, then you can also do that. So the Cascara pattern, again, is a two-bar phrase, and depending on whether you are in a 3-2 or a 2-3 direction, it will start slightly different. So this is the pattern itself first, and then we will play that along with the clave. So very slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Now let's play it on the cascara. 1, 2, 3, 4. The way I'm starting that pattern is in 3-2. All right. So with the 3-2 clave, it will sound like this. My bad. 1, 2, 3, 4. Two, 3 will sound like this. So let's play the cascara by itself first, 3-2, so you can hear it just by itself, and then 2-3. So here's 3-2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Two, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Now, 2, 3 will start like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Okay. There's two ways you can play these on the timbalas. You can play it playing the cascara as I did before, or you could just play it the cascara, and then the left hand will be on beats 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't matter which direction of the clave you start, it will always be the same. Basically, what this hand is doing is doubling the conga drum, the slap and the open tones. Okay? So whether it's 2-3 or 3-2, it will always start the same way. Okay? So that's another way of playing it. Then we have a slightly different cowbell pattern that we can use when we're playing Latin jazz, typical tumbao. And in 3-2 clave, that cowbell pattern sounds like this. There's two ways to start that pattern. You can either skip the first note, which is what you will do most of the time, or add it the very first time through and then take it away. So adding this note, because the rhythm itself is just this. right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So if you notice on the 3 side, you don't play the downbeat, okay? But when you start the rhythm for the first time, you can go ahead and add downbeat, right? Okay, and then don't play it after the first time through. But just as a starting point, you can add that downbeat when starting on the 3-2 side. When you start on the 2-3 side, then you start with the downbeat. That's how that side of the pattern starts anyway, and then it sounds like this. So let's just play that pattern by itself. I'm going to do it 2-3 slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Like we did with the Cascara, besides playing this Clave pattern with the Clave, you could also play the left hand in 2 and 4. It's the same way you play it when you were playing the Cascara. And it will sound like this. In 2-3 sounds this way. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. In 3, 2, 1. And again, I'm going to start the very first time through adding a downbeat. Then I'm going to take it out because that's kind of the way the pattern should be played in 3, 2, with a eighth note rest on the beginning of the 3 side of the Clave. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool thing about this instrument is in any given tune you have to transition from playing the Cascara to play the bells, and so we typically play some sort of an ornament to do that. An easy one is just to play 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Ring shot and then open thumb right on the middle of the drum. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm gonna start. Let's stay on the 3-2 side of things because that's a lot more common in Latin jazz than the 3-2. So let's just stick to the 2-3 for the sake of time. And I'm gonna play 2 cycles of Clave, in other words, 4 bars of Cascara, and then at the end of the 4th bar, I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, and switch to the cowbell pattern. Okay, 1, 2, 2, 3, and go R. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could also play rhythms. So you could play a 9-stroke roll, leaning in to from the fourth beat of the last of the fourth bar of every 4-bar cycle. So at the fourth part of the Cascara, I'm gonna play a 9-stroke roll, leaning into the downbeat of the beginning of the cowbell pattern. Then when I return from the cowbell to the Cascara, I'm gonna play the 1, 2, 3, 4. We usually play rolls to transition from Cascara to cowbell. Not so much the other way around, though there's exceptions to the rule. So a typical way of using a 9-stroke roll and the 1, 2, 3, and 4, the cierre, that's how we usually refer to that as like the closure feel, a closing feel. Sounds like this. Again, in 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Play a 5-stroke roll the first time through, but you get the idea. Then the next 3 times I did play the 9-stroke roll. But that's that's kind of what you could do when you're transitioning back and forth between the Cascara and the cowbell and vice versa. The other 2 rhythms that I demonstrated on the previous video were the plena, bomba. I also did a little bit of calypso and a little bit of merengue. Merengue is not typically played on timbales, so I don't really gonna discuss that. I'm gonna play the plena and the bomba and the calypso. But before I do that, I'm also gonna talk about the 6/8. When you play cha-cha-cha, the conga drums is the same pattern, not in the timbales. When you play cha-cha-chas on the timbales, you basically play 4 quarter notes on the mouth of the bell, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be a cha-cha-cha rhythm, okay? Very simple. Your left hand is playing 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. About this rhythm is that you can embellish the cowbell pattern a little bit, adding some drags and some fills, such as this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1. That'll be the cha-cha-cha. The 6/8, you can play the standard cowbell pattern that everybody knows. Sounds like this. I'm just playing 1 and 4, right? You can change it, just accentuate the last 2 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. The other thing you could do, this will take a little more coordination, is there's another bell pattern that sometimes we play on a bembe, which sounds by itself sounds like this. This is the 1 and the 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So So you could combine those two. Let's do it slow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Even slower. All right. The other rhythm we talked about in the previous video was plena. This instrument is not normally used in plena, but if you're playing in a salsa setting or a Latin jazz setting, then you can by all means adapt it, right? So one standard pattern you could use, which happens to be the same one or one of the ones you could use for Calypso, is basically playing eighth notes. Again, that rhythm is in cup time. 1, 2, 1. So you can play eighth notes, 2 on the mambo bell and 2 on the cowbell cha-cha bell. So 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Right. So if we think of the conga part. So that's one way. Another way of playing it is playing all those eighth notes in here, right? And you can add some embellishments as I will do. But essentially, the pattern is just this. Okay? You can also change it into this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Okay, and then so as I mentioned before, that pattern could be used for the Calypso. Okay, another one that could be used for the Calypso is this. So slower, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, For the bomba, which is the other rhythm that I share in the previous video, if you are playing the Cascara, then you could use this rhythm. Actually, you can use the same rhythm on the cowbell, but some people switch to a slightly different bell pattern that I will share with you. But a basic default pattern is this one bar phrase that sounds like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 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 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. Left hand on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Change the pattern a little bit when you get to the cowbell, and so this is another variation that most people like to use, including myself, which sounds like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. use kind of the same approach that I shared before, is if you have to switch between Cascara and Cowbell, using the 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so for instance, you could go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So forth and so on. Okay, so those are some of the most common rhythms that you will get to play on a Latin music, Latin jazz setting. The next videos, I'm gonna play both of these instruments together and sort of demonstrate some of those. At the beginning of the class, we started talking about the clave, and I stressed the importance of understanding this rhythm, and more than just the rhythm, the concept, how everything is governed, if you will, or determined by this rhythm that we call the clave. So when we talk about improvisation, we have to sort of go back to that conversation about the clave, because improvising in Latin music and Afro-Cuban music is directly related to the concept of clave. That timbal solo that I played before, every single phrase, every single rhythm that I was playing, I was being mindful of the clave. In a way, the clave is the harmony that I'm playing to. So when a melodic instrument is improvising, that person is mindful of what chord you're playing, whether it's a minor, a major chord, or a dominant chord, and you need to make sure that you play the right notes that belong to that chord. For us, in Latin percussion, the clave is kind of the harmony, right? So and we need to be mindful that we play the right notes that belong to that rhythm, to that harmonic rhythm that we call the clave, if you will. So I want to do just a couple of exercises to help you sort of understand and learn to play phrases that sound correct with the clave. And before I do that, I just want to stress one important thing. Oftentimes when we think about improvisation, we think, well, I could just play pretty much anything. I'm improvising, and that's not quite true. Or there's this misconception that everything we play is just spontaneously created and it just comes out of nowhere. Not quite true either, because a lot of the things that we do as improvisers are things that we have explored before, or we have some sort of an understanding that enable us to pull from different sources as we improvise, right? Whether it's melodic or harmonic, we have explored certain concepts that enable us to speak spontaneously. At the end of the day, music, as we all know, is a language, and the idea is just to be able to speak the language as fluent as possible. And in order to do that, there are certain concepts and certain ideas and certain foundations, such as the rhythm of the clave, that we have to thoroughly understand in order to be able to speak that language as fluent as possible. And then the other thing, from a rhythmic and drumming standpoint, is sometimes we all, myself included, we fall into the trap of playing too much too soon. What I mean by that is you start your solo playing like as much as you can and playing all kinds of rolls and rudiments and the whole bag of tricks that you have already developed in the practice room. And sometimes that happens and sometimes that's fine. But a lot of time, the problem with that is that, number one, the audience, it's really hard for them to connect. And so they almost 10 seconds into the solo, they are totally disengaged because they can no longer follow what you're trying to say. And the other thing is, it's really hard to sustain the energy or to build a story. And at the end of the day, the solo is like a story that you want to build. You want to start from something somewhat simple, then build that, add to the story, then get to a climax point, and then resolve that. So one couple of key points that we can keep in mind as we explore the idea of building a story or telling a story is, number one, use space as much as you can. Think in terms of motifs and ideas, rhythmic ideas that you are going to develop. What's going to be the main theme of your story, so to speak? Build that, add to it. You can change that or you can develop that rhythmically. You can just embellish. You can add some rolls and rudiments to it. If you are a harmonic instrument, then you can manipulate that by moving that to a different key. And so forth and so on. So, so it's important to be mindful of, okay, I'm telling a story and want to try to be as clear as possible and make sure that I allow myself and allow those listening to me to sort of follow along the story that I'm saying. And so our job and our task is to be as clear as possible. So I like to think about the 3S concept, or the triple S concept: syncopation, silence, and sequences. Those three things. And if we do that, and we are mindful of the clave and what we discussed before, how the three side tends to be more syncopated. And therefore, that's kind of the side of the clave that I like to think as the tension point, and then the two as the release point. And I'm always thinking in those terms as well: tension, release, alongside the idea of syncopation, silence, and sequences, and how can I use those. Another way to sort of learn how to play solos that sound like you're telling a story is just to use melodies. There's plenty of great melodies out there who are based on simple rhythms. So I mentioned at the beginning the classic Manteca, which is based on basically on a cowbell pattern. If you listen to it, that's pretty much a variation of the Cascara pattern, or the timbale, or the cowbell pattern, if you will. So I'm going to take that actually, and I'm going to build a solo around that, using that simple phrase, that simple rhythmic idea, and keeping the clave. Okay. Let's see what happens with that. So here's the clave, right? 1, 2, ara, bidi bidi bidi, bidi 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 ba, bidi ba ba, bidi ba ba, bidi ba ba ba, bidi bidi ba, bidi 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 ba, bidi ba, bidi ba ba, bidi ba ba, bidi ba ba, bidi ba, bidi bidi ba da da. All right, so what can you do? So how can you practice this when you get to the drums, the congas, or the timbales? Before you do that, sit down, clap the clave, and try to take a rhythm, like a 2-bar phrase rhythm, and play that with the clave, and then find ways to manipulate that motif. Okay, and see if you can sort of build a story around that concept, right? And again, so the idea is just to be mindful of that clave. Like, we can just play a solo in which we start playing paradiddles, 9-stroke roll, 5-stroke rolls, all those rhythms, and that's okay. That's totally fine. But it might not sound as authentic or as appropriate in the Latin music idiom, if you will, as if you were to think in terms of syncopation and clave, and how those syncopations work with the clave. And again, in general, that 3 side is the side that tends to be more rhythmically syncopated. So you can think of those things. And then think of the 2 side as the side that is less syncopated. You could always challenge that rule and sort of deviate from it. But in general terms, just as a starting point. So let's take a couple of ideas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a rhythm, I'm going to play it, a 2-bar phrase, and the idea is that you will sing that rhythm back, and while you're clapping. So we all be clapping. We will start clapping, and then I will play a 2-bar phrase, and you will answer back to me, but keep the clave. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, tira, ba ba, bira, ara, 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 dee 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 da ah. Da. Dee 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 da da All right. So practice that. Go back and replay this section of the video and try again that call and response with me. Listen to the 2-bar phrase that I play. Try to repeat that. Maybe at first you don't do the clave. Maybe just play on your instrument. But try to get to the point in which you could do it. Play the clave and sing those rhythms, and then go to the drums and play around with it. Right? Whether it's the Conga Drums or the timbales. If you are a trumpet player or a piano player or whatever, you can still do the same thing, right? Just take, I don't know, the blues or any chord or a 2-5-1, right? And then do the same thing. Check out those phrases that I was playing and try to find a line for those notes and think of the clave, or maybe sing the clave and play the line if you are a piano player or mallet player. Of course, if you're a brass player, you won't be able to do the same thing. I guess you could tap it, but at least be mindful about it and see how those rhythms that I was using relate to the clave. This will just give you another sort of option when you're soloing. You could sort of transpose and translate all those licks and all those ideas that you normally play on a bebop tune or any other style of straight ahead piece and use those rhythms and those harmonic ideas in a Latin tune. But if you want to just make your vocabulary more richer and more more interesting, then you can just add these ideas of thinking more rhythmically. And using typical Latin phrases and Latin rhythms and using the idea of the clave as a guiding source, if you will, that dictates the way you shape the rhythms and the way you build your rhythmic ideas. So in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about improvisation on the mallet keyboard on the marimba, but the concepts that I'm going to be talking about could be applied to any other melodic instrument or brass instrument for that matter, or a vocalist for that matter. So stay tuned and see you soon. A lot of the things that I was discussing on the previous video about improvisation and with the timbales and the Latin percussion, rhythmically speaking, all of those concepts could be applied to here. The idea of syncopation, trying to create rhythmic tension, using space, taking a motif and developing that motif and playing over the line and doing all those things, rhythmic displacement. All of those ideas could be used when you're improvising on a melodic instrument like the marimba, the vibraphone, the guitar, the trumpet, whatever the case may be. On that D minor blues, that is what I've been using as a backup track for the improvisation section. A couple of things that you could do from a melodic source material. Let's say we want to use like a modal approach to it. So we're going to play the entire thing using a single scale. And let's just use the pentatonic scale, the minor pentatonic scale. So we're going to do D minor pentatonic, D, F, G, A, D, and we're going to use C, D, right? And we're going to use that scale as the source for the improvisation. So couple of things we could do. Of course, you know, the basic thing we could do is just to walk the scale, but we don't really want to just walk the scale up and down. We could do things such as group of 4 notes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That sort of thing. I like to make things a little more interesting, and instead of moving in the same direction, I like to sort of mix and match, going ascending and descending. So one way I could sort of explore that concept is I could starting on the root, everything I'm going to start on the root, I could play D, F, and then A, G, right? Then moving to the next note, that will be F, F, G, C, A, then G, A, D, C, and so forth and so on. So I could create lines using that shape of ascending, descending. Right? Another thing you could do is use that idea, but which I sort of did on the last one, incidentally, but also add a little bit of rhythmic displacement, and just to make the whole thing more interesting. So I'm gonna use a slightly different pattern. I'm gonna start descending and ascending. So I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna start this on the second note of the scale, which will be F. So I'm gonna go F, right? F, D, C, A, right? So F, D, C, A. Repeat the F. Right? So I could combine those two. I'm gonna take 2 choruses using those two's idea in regards to the minor pentatonic. Let's see how that sounds. Next pattern. Okay, so that gives you an idea. Of course, I treated that now as an exercise. I won't probably do a whole chorus of the same pattern all over and over, but as an exercise, you could just pick one of those patterns and try to go over the entire form, and see what you can come up with, and then just try to vary the rhythms, like going back to the first pattern, the ascending descending thing. So all of that is based on the same scale, on the pentatonic scale, and I will do that with any other scale. I could take the blues scale and kind of do the same thing. Be creative with it instead of just walking the scale and playing, the same things. It's just try to come up with a pattern, or think of a rhythm, or think of a motif. So actually, let's explore the idea of a motif. So let's say my motif is going to be 3 notes, right? It's going to play the triad right there, okay? Everything is going to be groupings of 3 notes, and I'm going to go descending all the time. but what I'm going to be trying to vary is the rhythms. So I could start on the downbeat, dee-dee-da. I could start on the offbeat, dee-da-da. I could start as a pickup, da-dee-dee-da. I could do triplets, ya-da-da. I could start the triple on the offbeat, dee-dee-da, da-dee-dee, right? I could play 60 notes, or I could play any rhythm with those that is in groups of 3, right? And then I'm gonna think of a descending motif all the time. For now, just maybe let's move away from the minor pentatonic just to try something else. Let's just try the arpeggios. So let's just think about the most simple chord progression in the blues. So we're going to start with the D minor, then we're going to move to the 4th G minor, go back to the D minor, and then the tonic. And I'm going to just play triads. But what I'm going to do is just try to vary the rhythm. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play without the backup track. See if you can hear the harmonic changes throughout without the supporting backup track, which is something that I would highly recommend. Playing with backup tracks and practicing with backup tracks is great, but another way to really sort of force yourself or challenge yourself to build your lines, in the most clear and coherent harmonic way is just to practice with a metronome and then listen back to it and make sure that when you listen back to your lines, you can actually hear the chord progression without even having a backup track underneath, because sometimes we become too dependent of having a bass or a piano or a guitar playing the harmonies, and it shouldn't be the case. A good solo should be able to stand on itself without the harmonies underneath, and the challenge is for us to make sure that the lines that we play clearly outline the harmonies. So I'm going to just use triads, and what I'm going to do is just think rhythmically. And of course, I'm going to be thinking in phrases and trying to make the whole thing sound as musical as possible. So this will be the tempo: 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hopefully, you heard the chord progressions in there. Let's try adding some other stuff to just maybe changing the rhythms a little bit more. One more time, just try it, and also the upper extensions of the triad. So let's see if we can add the 9s and the 7s in there. 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, hopefully you will be able to hear the progression. I also tried to use the idea of metric displacement, pushing the beat. The meter a little bit and playing over the line, over the bar line a little bit. So another thing that I think we can explore and try to incorporate is the idea of trying to be more rhythmic when building your solo, like I was talking about with the timbales. To me, I like to call it the principle of the 3S: syncopation, silence, sequences, right? Think about those 3 things, right? Try to be as syncopated as you can be. Use silence, so you let other people contribute to your solo, and then think about sequences. How can you take a motif, a rhythmic motif, and sequence that, and make it sound interesting in your solo. So I'm going to go back to the track and try to think very rhythmically, leave some space, leave some silence, and then see if I can come up with some sequences and use that as well. some of these ideas are useful to you, just, explore, listen to other players, and see what they do. Check out how they use rhythms, how they manipulate this idea of sequences and syncopation. Always remember the importance of the clave when we're playing this music. That's another way of making sure that your rhythmic choices are as solid and as authentic from a style standpoint as they can be. So, go back and revise my discussion about rhythms and improvising with the clave on my previous section, and see what you can come up with that. I will take one more course just for fun, and this will be the last thing I will do for the masterclass. I hope you found this interesting and useful, and stay safe, and see you soon.